In order to have adults who take into account the way the 6 to 12 children function, there is the need for preparation in many aspects, in many fields of our life as adults. We need to understand who that child is, how his mind works. We need to understand what would be the benefits for a prepared environment for that child. We need to learn in order to help them manage their own challenges. So for that, there is a training course. Yes. AMI, Association Montessori International, actually had thought about it for a long time. How should a course look like in order to help the adult and to enable him to help the children?
Well, like any profession, there's training that has to happen. And as you said, we have to, if you want to work with children, then you need to understand human development. You need to understand, the human being and what are those characteristics that we have as human beings that help us learn. And we need to understand the principles of learning. And we're really making, as a species, we're really making some incredible leaps in knowledge and understanding of how children learn, mm-hmm. how adults learn. And there are some basic principles like interest, activity, mm-hmm. Engagement, agency, that the idea that you are in control of your learning.
Context,
that
social context.
The social context. Learning is social.
Mm-hmm.
Learning is not just about gaining facts, but it's about skills, gaining skills, practicing skills, getting knowledge and context of the skills you have. It's about the attitude you have towards learning new things. So, we need to really think about, when we're talking about teaching adults to work with children, helping them understand, what is it they need to know?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a theoretical aspect to any training. And that the theory for us is understanding, one, human development. How does it happen from birth all the way through? What are those stages of development? How does that unborn child become an adult human being who's a member of society? We need to understand the changes that happen through time.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Montessori had these wonderful powers of observation, a very scientific, objective approach that she applied while she was looking at children. And that helped her see the different characteristics of these children at different ages, how they changed. It allowed her to see how the children interacted with the environment and what they needed, what they were interested and motivated to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
And she reflected on her observations and she made changes. So for instance, one of the materials we use, the golden bead material, originally she thought it would be good for the older children, 7, 8 years old, to look at and use for mathematics. And so when she brought it and it was shown to the children, these older children were looking at it and kind of going, yeah, okay.
Mm.
But she found, because the children were free to move about in the environment, to go and observe things, she found those younger children,
were more interested.
5-year-olds, coming over and going, what's that? Can I touch it? Can I see it? And she realized what she as an adult thought was right for the children was actually not for the older children, but perfect for the younger children.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that process of experimenting, learning from her own mistakes, that she discovered how important it was to create an environment that supported the children's natural characteristics for learning things.
But in order to do that experiment, you need to study first. Maria Montessori studied.
Yes.
And then she observed.
Yes.
And she had an open mind, observing the children.
Yes.
And then she turned that observation into an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So our courses are actually preparing adults able and courageous enough to have that experience of their own experience as a teacher transformed into an experiment.
Yes.
But that has to be a responsible experiment.
Yes. And it's the nice thing is that you and we didn't have to go through the same process that Dr. Montessori went through. She had a lot of internal motivation to do what she did. We can learn from her experiences because she wrote down what she saw happening. She made observations. She shared what she learned with other people through writings, through talking. And so that's the theoretical aspect that we can now spend a much shorter amount of time on than she had to. I mean, her work spans decades, but we can do this, look back and learn from her experiences through studying her writing, through discussing, watching videos of children in classrooms, thinking about concepts, reading about human development, and interacting with each other in a social way, in this sort of theoretical aspect as adults trying to learn about children. So we have to be engaged. We have to be curious. We're interested and we're active learners in discovering the theory of human development, of child development. And that's how we as adults have to be learning too. So that's only one part of what we need to do. Because the Montessori approach is not just about theory. As you said, it's about recreating the experiments in a way, offering to the children a prepared environment that meets their characteristics, that was discovered and developed by Dr. Montessori in her time and continued development with other people who had learned from her. I think of, for the 6 to 12, I think of Camillo Grazzini and Margaret Stevenson and many other people around the world. But we prepare the environment. We show the children how to connect to that environment, how to engage with the different materials and objects that are there so that they can continue to explore. But then we have to step back and observe them. We have to give them that freedom to dig deeper, to repeat and to expand what they're doing. And that's actually where it gets really hard for adults.
Yeah.
Because learning theory, understanding human development, we're kind of used to doing that in the traditional system all the way through, our own schooling, our secondary school, university. We're pretty good at reading things and coming to understand them through discussion. But the way that we work with children in our Montessori classrooms, whether it's under 6 or over 6, unless you went to a Montessori school yourself, is completely different from what we experience in a traditional classroom. And so somehow we have to help adults understand the difference. And because there's no experience really for most adults who are taking our courses, the question we have to figure out is how best to do that. And that's not an easy question.
It's not an easy question. It's actually layers of knowledge that we try to build, or we try to help students build in their own experience. And we do start with theory, as you said, but that's only the first layer, let's say, on which the students build their own experience.
Yeah. Yes.
What would be the second layer?
I think the second thing that we do is help adults understand how they perceive as a simple task actually is made up of many smaller tasks. And that those smaller tasks can be broken down into even smaller pieces. It's a little bit like, the table is made of wood, and it has the top, it has the legs, and it has a coat of paint on it. So a table is just one thing, but now we can look at the parts of the table. But then we can go even further and we can say, well, what kind of wood?
Yeah.
And where did the wood come from? And what did we think about with the paint? What's in the paint? What
Why does it
makes the
have
paint?
3 legs?
Why 3 legs and not 4?
Yeah.
What's going, so we can keep going deeper and deeper and looking at smaller and smaller details. And we need to do that as adults because we've forgotten how we learned to do these complex tasks. Think about tying your shoelace, tying your laces. I see you have laces on today. I don't. But, if you watch as if you were a child, imagine yourself as a child watching an adult tie their shoelace. It kind of looks like this.
Yeah, exactly.
The magical fingers.
Some children even do that.
They do, because they're watching. It's like it's a magic show, really. They're like, see, untied laces. Now there's a bow,
That's exactly what they saw.
That's what they saw. And it's magical to them. So what we help children or help adults do is to understand children need to see things more slowly. They need the task broken down into each step-by-step activity to get to the tied shoelace. And there are skills you need with a hand in order to be able to tie your shoelace. If you can't, if you can only grasp things like this, you can't pick up a lace to be able to tie them. So there are things that need to be in place even before you can start to show how to tie a shoelace.
Exactly. Before the students get to work with the children, they have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
They have this movement analysis, we call it in 3 to 6.
Yes.
It's a technique that you need to I want to avoid the word master. Practice enough so that your movements become clear, really crystal clear, so that the child understand and get interested in what you in your movements, because naturally he is interested in movement.
Yes.
But he is interested in coordinated movements. And that's why as our students really need to practice that skill in 3 to 6.
Yes. Well, and in 6 to 12, it's more about the reasoning process, the logical thought process that brings you to the correct conclusion. And so unlike movement, which is very visible, we now have to analyze our thought process. What are the logical steps that we take in order to get to a particular conclusion or to get a particular result? And we have to learn how to make that visible to children. And that involves, one, breaking down and thinking about all the steps that are involved in long multiplication. It involves thinking about the vocabulary you need, the nomenclature you need to talk about the work of the river. What does the river do? We need to think about, how do liquids behave? So we have to help isolate those aspects for the children. Because if we don't know how a liquid behaves, it's hard to understand what work a river does and how it transforms the landscape around it. And those are the kinds of things then, adults probably know. Well, rivers, they'll wear away the soil and they create valleys.
The same way we know how to learn how to tie shoes.
Exactly. I learned it in school. That's
I know
how
how to tie shoes. Why do I have to deconstruct that movement?
Right.
And then construct it again for the child? It's a dedication.
It is.
It is.
Yeah. And it's not always easy, because as adults, we don't remember how we learned it. And maybe we just memorized it. Sometimes we memorized it, but we didn't like it. We weren't good at it as far as the grades were concerned in school. We avoided the subject as soon as we possibly could. I stopped taking math when I could stop taking math, or I didn't take any more history. We lost interest in things because they were too hard or too easy, or we just didn't like the teacher we had. And so we also have to overcome some of that those experiences we had that weren't so pleasant.
Yeah.
Because really, everything that you see different human beings doing in the world we're all capable of doing. We're all capable of being artists. We're all capable of being musicians. We're all capable of being musicians and rocket scientists and politicians. We could do any of those things because we're human beings. We have this potential at birth. But we have our own interests, our own personalities, our own capabilities. And as we grow and change and learn, those shift and expand. We focus. Because even though we're capable of doing everything, it's not possible for us to do everything. We have to make choices. And that's okay. But if we're going to work with children of 6 to 12 who are interested in the world, then we need to think about how do they learn those things. And we have to learn how to break things down. And that's not easy.
That's not easy. So it needs time.
It does.
It needs time. And I watch my students working in practical life. And that seems to be the hardest for the beginners, for the students at the beginning, because they really have to become aware of the way, first of all, of the way they move. Is that clear? Watch yourself in the kitchen. Going with a teaspoon from here, to take the cup from the other place and bring it back. Why did you take the spoon with you? That was an unnecessary movement, right? Which the child absorbs if you do that in front of him, right? So it does need time. And I always tell my students, take one material, simple material, let's say pouring, and practice until you feel it. Until you feel it like a dance, right? You put your hand slowly, not for yourself. You can do it very slow at the beginning. For the child, you have to adapt the speed to the need he has. But it is necessary to practice or this decomposition of the movement in order to build it clear.
Yes. Yeah.
And that takes time. And that's why our courses in 3 to 6, we have 150 hours of supervised practice. That means the students are working with the materials the same way the children do. So a child, in order to be concentrated on his work, he needs to practice over and over again. He has that need. Yeah.
I think it's very similar with, thinking about adults working with the 6 to 12 children. Math is kind of the most obvious one, because often the adults are very eager to rush the children off of the materials because they're like, well, I know how to work with fractions. And we often have to have them slow down, work with the materials. Equivalence of fractions is one that comes to mind. It's, well, I know that a half is equal to a third. I know that, 2/4 is equal to a half. Not a half is equal to a third. I don't know why I said that. But, I know that 2/4 is equal to a half. I know that 4/8 is equal to a half. And what's interesting is that when we can get the adults to work with the material and manipulate the material, slow themselves down, they make discoveries that when they've been rushing ahead abstractly based on the pattern they know, they miss some things. So for instance, a half is equal to 2/4. Well, what would be the next one? Well, the pattern is multiply by 2, so the next one would be 4/8. But in our materials, we have something between 4ths and 8ths that also equals a half. 3/6. And when we're working and giving a presentation where the adults are watching a small group work with the materials, they often, their heads are down, they're writing, they're making notes on the presentations, and they've already written ahead because they know what's happening. And then they hear the person up at the front working and they go, 3/6. And all of a sudden the heads all pop up because the brain was surprised. I predicted 8ths. Why is 6 there? And then you see on their face that kind of shock surprise, but then they go, oh yeah, 3/6 is equal to a half. They know it, but because the ones out there listening weren't using the material, they miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, the children, if they're not using the material, they miss it. But they don't have that, they didn't know that 3/6 was equal to a half like the adult does. And the children have to use the material. And if the adults aren't familiar with the material themselves, haven't worked with it, come to see some of the problems that can be discovered through working with the material and how to solve those problems, if they don't have that experience themselves, they really don't understand the value for the children to work with the materials.
Exactly. So they don't know how to encourage it.
Yes.
Or they might stop the children if they don't see the value of working longer with those materials.
Yeah. It's that rush to abstraction.
It's the rush to abstraction.
There's a push there from society, from parents, from traditional education, because, we tend to want to compare to know, something that we don't know about. We're like, okay, well, let's relate it to something we know. The education that we know is our own experiences in the traditional, so we want to compare the children. But how they approach education in the traditional is different from how we approach in Montessori. And we can't rush to that paper and pencil because we're really looking for understanding with the material.
The same way we are looking for concentration in 3-6. You cannot rush concentration.
No.
Concentration has to happen, just happen.
Yes.
You cannot rush that. But in order to reach concentration, you really need to know the material and, most important, to adapt that material for the child. Or if you didn't work with the material, then you don't know the pattern. If you don't know the pattern, then you cannot move your attention from what you do to what the child needs.
Exactly.
So you really need to, now I can use that, master the presentation.
Yes.
In order to be able to really observe the child while you are doing the presentation. And give the child exactly from that presentation what he needs.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I like that example of the tailor, because that's where, that's the power of Montessori. And that's the power of a tailor. A tailor can take, this clothing that I've bought at the store in a particular size, and I can bring it and say, I really like it, but it doesn't quite suit my body type. Can you fix it a little bit for me? Add a little here, take a little bit out there, adjust this a bit. And then suddenly it goes from just, a nice piece of clothing to a stunning piece of clothing, because the tailor understands how to take a pattern of clothing and adjust it so it fits yourself, your body perfectly. And that's the art of teaching too. We understand the pattern of human development. We understand how to work with materials and how to show the children how to work with them. And then as we observe them working, we can say, you need a new layer. You need another little piece of information about this. You need another skill from another area, another piece of knowledge that needs to be brought in. And so when we understand the possibilities with all the materials and all the subject areas in our classroom, when we've worked with them ourselves and started to see those connections that are possible, we, through our observation of the children, can understand what might be the next piece. And we can just keep weaving a tapestry for the children, allowing them to really fill in the colors and everything. But we keep building that foundation that they will then build even further upon.
And thinking about what happens in this time of supervised practice, supervised by the trainer, when all the students are working, it is amazing to see they are not only working, but they are observing each other. They've seen the presentation, and now they know the model in their mind. But how do you bring it to your hands? And now you can see how they observe each other and comment. They learn how to comment nicely.
Yes. Giving appropriate feedback.
Yes, like constructive feedback to each other. And they learn from each other because I see you do it differently. Does it still make sense? So their mind is open, not only to a fixed pattern, but to a pattern that is possible this way and is possible this way. You can say it this way or you can do it the other way. It is still possible. But they start from a model.
Yeah.
And they do learn from each other. As you said, learning is social.
And like the 6 to 12-year-old children, there is the what if I do it a little bit differently? Oh, it still works. Yay. You know, there is more than one way to tie our shoelace. I think too that, you know, as they're practicing with the materials, they do need that opportunity to get feedback, as you say, immediately. It's not really effective when it's too late afterwards.
Yeah.
And you can't give effective feedback to yourself when you're a beginning learner. It's, you know, you need that expert to offer you the immediate feedback to help you establish good habits, good practice in the beginning. It's kind of like why in the 3 to 6 you start with the practical life, because the movements are fundamental and they go through all the other areas, language and math, you know, writing and things. For us in the 6 to 12, it's the same thing. We always start with those materials, with the foundational concepts. We we give a big picture story to give the whole, and then we examine the details, always connecting it back to the whole. And it's important to do that because that's how adults too. Adults say, so why do we need to know this? And that's why we want to start with theory with our adults, because here's the theory of human development. This is why we're doing this. Now let's look at our particular age group of children and let's look at the materials. And when you're practicing, you can sometimes get caught up in the details of how to manipulate fraction pieces to find equivalents. But the expert comes in at that point, one, to help you manipulate them correctly, but also to say, so what does the child observe? Where is the child in your presentation? How is the child discovering what you want them to see? What characteristics are you engaging when you give this presentation? And for us in the elementary, the things that we say, where the children are in relationship to us, you know, how clearly they see what we're doing, we have to be thinking about those things. And it's hard for adults who are just trying to get a process down to also think about that at the same time.
Yes.
So when they're in that process, they need to follow the steps accurately in the right order to get to the right result. But then they also then have to start thinking about the children. And they don't have enough experience to be able to do all of that without someone guiding them.
Yep.
And they need it in that moment. You know, it's, you know, the right feedback at the right time. And when you're practicing with materials, you need that feedback right in that moment. And so that's why it's so important to have it on site with experts and experienced people, whether it can be the trainers, but it could be teachers who have lots of years of experience in the classroom. But you need that in the moment.
And it's also, a feedback is also a lack of answer. For example, a student practicing with the first practical life material, and she started to ask a lot of questions. And instead of answering the questions, you turn her back to the material. What does the material say? What is, so maybe that's a good question, but this is a question for later.
Yes.
So they also learn how to hold on to their own questions to protect their own discoveries. Because this is very important. When you practice and you discover, you get encouraged, you get more interest, you get motivated to discover more. And then if you're with another friend next to you, then together you get so much involved in everything you do. And that's exactly what you want from children.
Mm-hmm. And as adults, we tend to try and jump ahead. Because we do have that longer term vision. We don't live in the moment in the same way. And so the adults kind of get impatient. They're like, but I know the answer to this question. Why do I have to manipulate the material? And it's like, because you're trying to connect children to the process. Yeah. You're not trying to get to the right answer, but connect them to the process. And they often ask questions. Well, what about the child who understands it already? It's like, okay, that happens. But typically, children need this presentation and to work through this process first. And if the child's, if you have a child who gets to the answer, well, probably one of two things. One, you're giving this presentation too late because the child already knows how to get to the answer without manipulating the material. Or two, that child's been busy watching and observing other children working with that presentation and the material in that way, and they've learned it already. Mm-hmm. Either way, you need to do more than what you were doing just then. You need to go further a little bit faster. Mm-hmm. And that's the observation. That's that reflection process that we have to take. And adults, we want to jump ahead. We want to be, we know the end. Let's just get to the end already. But it's really about the process itself, taking the time and learning how to ask the right question.
And in 3 to 6 is also the case for 6 to 12. The students need to get this skill or patience, let's say, to reflect on their own experience. Mm-hmm. And we have these journals at the end of the supervised practice session. They use at the end of the supervised practice session to take time, 5 minutes or as much time as you feel like. Mm-hmm. And you write down a few words about your experience in that day. Because you want to learn to do that with the children. You want to write a bit about each child every day. Mm-hmm. Or if something happened, you want to take time to write down. Because when you reflect, you understand another layer. You put another layer on your own experience. Mm-hmm. And that is so important. That's how you become keen observer.
Yes.
That's when you start to understand what's going on with the children.
Mm-hmm. And that's not something that in traditional schools you're taught to do. It's get to the end. Did you get it right? Did you get it wrong? That's what matters. The product at the end, not the process. It's as important to understand why you got to that right conclusion as to why you got to a wrong conclusion, so that you can repeat the things that you did correctly and do them again. Yeah. So that you can do the things that went well again, change the things that didn't work, and to find when, sometimes things that we do, strategies we use, work in one situation, but not another. Mm-hmm. Sometimes memorizing is a good thing, a good strategy, but sometimes it's not a good strategy. So how do we know the difference? And that's something that through the experiences that the children have in the classroom, through the experiences the adults have with hands on the material in that group setting, those are things that happen for them that cannot happen alone.
Yes. Or online, if you're in front of a screen, mm-hmm. you are actually prevented to experience the most essential preparation for you as adult, like the hands-on materials, and in the same time the relationship with a partner or a colleague who's playing the role of a child for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think also that when you think about a camera and a video, it focuses your attention and it limits your attention to what the camera is pointed at. Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking about, think about a classroom with 25 people in it, adults or children, it doesn't matter. The camera can only focus on one portion in detail, or it can focus on the whole thing, but there's no detail. You can't have both at exact the same time, unless it's live. But even then, things get impacted. So the camera focuses your attention in a particular way on a particular aspect. So one of the things that I notice is that, if we have presentations for the elementary, we want adults to see what we're doing and manipulating with material. But there's a lot of material that we use to do different activities. Mm-hmm. So what they see is what's happening with our hands and the movement of materials, but they don't see where the extra material we need that we sort of reach out of camera and just bring in. It's a magic trick. Mm-hmm. It just appears suddenly. And when adults go to practice with that material, what I noticed is that they really have a hard time organizing that material in a logical manner so that it's easy to reach for the children. Because if you practice by yourself, you're only ever thinking about, can I reach it?
Yeah.
What is convenient for me by myself? For children in the 6 to 12 who need to be in a group, we can't just think about myself and where things are in relation to me. We have to think about it, in relation to all of us in the group. The adult who has a much longer reach than the child has to think about, how do the children reach that? If it's too far, what are they going to do to solve the problem? I need to reach, a box of bead bars that's on the other side of the table. Well, I have a few choices. I can stand up and walk around the table, get the bead bar, take what I need, come back around, sit down, and then put it.
Or ask somebody else.
That's a lot of work. I could ask the person next to me if they could reach it, but they may or may not be able to reach it. I could stand up and reach across the table and get the bead bars. I could kneel on my chair, reach across the table and get the bead bars. I could simply just be lying on the table and reaching the bead bars. Lots of possible solutions that the child can find. But when you practice by yourself in isolation, it's too easy to forget about the group that we want to work with. And for the elementary, that's a really important part. What are the children seeing? Mm-hmm. Are they seeing things upside down? Are they seeing them from the sides?
And when you're on site, you can actually, if you don't see enough from your place as a student, you have the freedom to stand up and come closer and see exactly what's going on there and understand. I remember from my own training, I used to watch the presentations in class. And I was many times the child for the presentations. And I would go home and write down the whole presentation from my head. Mm-hmm. And then again, with those notes, I would come next day and practice with the materials and see how much did I remember? How much did I remember after I wrote down? A lot. I remembered a lot because I watched, I wrote, I practiced. 3 layers already in 2 days.
Yes.
Of course, the knowledge gets settled in a more efficient way. Mm-hmm. Your whole body, your whole mind is involved.
Yeah. And I think too, when you're watching something for the first time, you're very focused on certain things, like the process. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to watch something, take notes, when you're watching something, just doing something that you know already, like, tying a shoelace, to think about all the steps. What added layer for the 6 to 12 is not just what you do with the material, it's what you say and when you say it. We don't isolate talking and doing as clearly as you do in the 3 to 6. So often, students are trying to take notes about what's happening with the material, what's being said, what at the same time. Mm-hmm. And then they're watching, but they're also writing. And so while they're writing something down, they can sometimes miss things that are happening. And that's where that social learning, where the students, if they're present, they can talk with each other. Mm-hmm. And they can, oh, you saw that step in there that I didn't get. They can talk with each other, have a discussion. If they have an outline of the presentation and how it's going to follow, that helps them get more from watching things.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, the adult is focused on the process to get the steps that need to be involved in order to present a concept or tell a story or whatever, do an experiment and demonstration with the children. But that's about themselves as individuals. So when they come back to practice in the 6 to 12, we often ask them to have 1 or 2 people with them when they practice presenting. I've practiced enough on my own. I understand the process. Let me give it to a small group and see how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
And when they give that presentation to 2 other people, all those things that they didn't think about when they were by themselves come to light. Oh, now I have 2 children. I had material on this side of where I was working, on this side and on this side, but now I have these 2 people beside me and I can't
or they don't see
reach across.
where they're sitting.
Yeah, or where they're sitting, they can't see. So that's a really important process for the adults to understand when they're going to work with children. And you can't get that working by yourself.
Or directly working with children.
No, because you don't have time to analyze it and to think about it. You're presenting to the children, and it's not that even practicing with those adults, you still are going to make mistakes with the children in the classroom,
definitely.
and that's okay. That's
but
okay.
you build the base for realizing those mistakes.
Yes,
that's actually what we want from children too. Not to make mistakes, but to understand their mistakes and to be able to correct them.
Yeah, and to reflect. To think about, what did I do? How did I get to where I am? I mean, that's a question often, when students are practicing on the course, they sometimes come over and say, okay, we have a question. And so I go over and they ask the question about something very specific with where they are with some material. And my question is always to them, tell me how you got to this point.
Yes.
Because I can see and they know that something has gone wrong, but they don't know what's wrong. And I don't know how to help them unless I understand the reasoning process they went through to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And just watching somebody manipulate things and move it does not help me understand what's going through their mind, that thought process.
Yes.
So you have to have that conversation in the moment. And just like happens with the children in the classroom when I ask that question, working with adults, I say, well, tell me what you did to get to this point. As they talk through that process, they often discover for themselves where they went wrong. Or one person's talking and the other person in the group says, wait, that's it. Mm-hmm. We should have. And through their own, because I've asked the right question for them to reflect on what they did, together, they solve their own problem. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that's one of my favorite parts about supervised practice.
Yes.
Seeing that's learning in the moment.
And yes, exactly. You do see a lot of learning, and that's very satisfying for you as a trainer, but also for the students.
Yeah.
Because that builds their enthusiastic for what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's not just learning, it's experimenting, discovering, making it your own.
Yes, yeah. And I think the other thing too is that when they have, that experience on site in the group where they have another adult come to them and model how to help that reflection process, that's also much more powerful because that's them experiencing it. It's not something they've ever experienced before. So we're still human beings. We still learn like children do. Mm-hmm. We still need sensorial experiences. We move more quickly because we have far more years of experience of life on this earth. We can move more quickly with certain things, but we still need that sensorial experience as adults. And different adults will learn at different speeds in different subjects. But when we have that person who comes and models how to interact with the children for us, we come to an understanding in a different way of what it means. And rather than just going into the classroom and saying, I don't know what to do in this situation, I'm just going to do what I know. Well, what do I know is my own educational experience, most likely traditional. And what happens in those situations when children encounter problems, the adult comes and says, well, this is the right answer, or this is the solution. Or, you know what, I don't know how you're going to work this out and you need to practice more. Let me give you a worksheet.
Yeah.
And that shortcuts the learning process for the children. It undermines that Montessori approach when we do those things. But it's a very human thing to go back to what we know.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I remember one question somebody asked me, why are AMI courses so long? Can you not make them shorter? And I had to reflect more on this question. And well, this change of paradigm takes time. It's not easy to go from your own experience in traditional education or conventional education, let's say. Yes. Maybe I like that word better. Yeah. To the vision and the approach Montessori has. It takes a long time. You have to build layers and layers. You have to allow yourself that experience of going back to your own education and reflect how you feel about it. What's the result of it? And then go back to Montessori, and you actually believe more in what you're doing when you have that, let's say, error, mistakes that you make. But it takes time, and most of our students who finish the course, they say it's too short because they finally discovered how much work you have to do with yourself. How much work you have. I think it's the hardest thing you need to do, to transform yourself so that you can reach the child for real. You see the child who he is for real.
Yeah. We build up habits all through our life. And whatever learning habits we have come from that environment that we've been in. And the habits that you need for that conventional education to be successful, to get the grades, to take the tests, are very different habits from how human beings learn naturally. And so if you're coming in to try and learn a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about education, a new way of approaching learning, then you have to break down those old habits and create new habits. And we know that takes time. I mean, there's a lot of research out there about how to build a new habit. You know, there are books about, there's a wonderful book, Atomic Habits, making little tiny changes. But even little tiny changes are hard. And we're not asking the adults who come to our courses to make little tiny changes in their learning habits or in their understanding of how teaching happens. We're asking them to make a huge leap, a very big shift in their understanding of what is learning, in their understanding of what I did in my conventional approach probably wasn't learning. And most schools don't teach how to learn. They teach how to do well on a test, which is not the same thing.
Or to kind of find the way to follow the child, not the curriculum. That is, again, a huge shift because your focus, your vision is totally different. Yeah, it's not the vision of a successful child. It's the vision of a fulfilled child, which is, it could be a difference, could be a huge difference. A child could be very successful in school, but not fulfilled. Yeah, not on his own path, not reaching out his meaning on this earth. Yeah. That's very true. Thank you very much, Kyla. Thank you.
Thank you. It was love. I love talking with you about these topics. They're deep.
They're deep. Yeah. And we discover more
every time
while we talk.
We do. And it's great to have that opportunity to reflect. And
Thank you.